friends. Thank you for stopping by my channel for another episode. I'm going to let you in a little bit on my process for making the Prepare Your Heart candle. This is a beautiful vanilla oak scented candle that's very relaxing, not too sweet, very clean scent, and it is great for seasons of preparation. I will leave links below in the show notes if you want to support my ministry. I would love to invite you to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below. Let me know how you hear God's voice in your life. This is, to me, just a fascinating area of study. My special guest is Saint Teresa of Avila herself. I've been reading Interior Castle, and she's amazing. But in the sixth mansion, Saint Teresa of Avila discusses understanding locutions and visions from God. We're going to talk about, first of all, what is a locution? Second of all, how do you know if it's from God? Because as Father Ripperger says, God is not the only one broadcasting on that channel. And then we're just going to talk about how God's voice sounds, how it sounds to hear God speak. And I'm really excited to dive into this. I really, really, really am excited. As you all know, discernment has been my main focus of my podcast, but so often we forget that number one, God really wants to speak to each of us. He wants to communicate with us. And number two, it's not going to sound the same for everybody. It's not going to be the same experience for everyone. The Lord is endlessly creative, and just like He created us with all these different personalities and needs and experiences, He's going to speak to each one of us in the particular way that we need at different particular times. And so this is I feel like the next frontier for my ministry is not only are we discerning God's will for our lives, it's not about figuring out a puzzle. If you've listened to my podcast, you'll know that I've said this so many times, and my guests have said this so many times. It's not about getting that one perfect answer. It's about a relationship with the Lord. And if you're like me, you've lived a good part of your life, like the first 25 years of my life, were not knowing that God could really He wanted to speak to me. This is huge. Well, God doesn't speak to me through a burning bush or a booming voice in the room. Therefore, God doesn't want to speak to me. No, there are so many ways that God can communicate with us. What is a locution? Saint Teresa of Avila, I'm going to be quoting her a lot. She says, "This awakening of the soul is effected by means of locutions, which are of many kinds. Some of them seem to come from without, others from the innermost depths of the soul, others from its higher part, while others again are so completely outside the soul that they can be heard with the ears and seem to be uttered by a human voice. Sometimes, often indeed, this may be a fancy, especially in persons who are melancholy or have feeble imaginations." I'm not sure what a feeble imagination is, but I've never heard imaginations described that way before. So a locution then is a communication from the Lord, and it can look a bunch of different ways. She goes on to say that locutions may come from God in any of the ways mentioned, or they may equally well come from the devil or from one's own imagination. St. Teresa encourages us to always follow a confessor's word rather than your own. If you think God is telling you to do something through a locution, it's best to check with a spiritual director. I've often tried over the years to define and describe how God's voice sounds to me. The best description that I can give is that it's like remembering something that I never knew before. What the heck does that mean? What it means is in that place of memory where your brain operates, like if I say to you, think about your mother speaking to you. You can probably hear your mother's voice or your father's voice in your head, right? And it's not as though you're actually hearing that voice, but as though you're recalling it. So hearing God speak is in that place of recalling a voice that you know, but it's not the voice of anyone I've ever met before on earth. Furthermore, it's something I never knew before. It's something that I did not invent, that it's not just my imagination coming up with what I want to hear, but it's actually a thought that I've never had before. So it's very interesting to hear this validated by St. Teresa of Avila. It's funny, I've been doing discernment ministry all these years, and I've just never come across Interior Castle before now. So, thank the Lord to continue to learn, continue to grow. It's really cool to hear how she's kind of like St. Ignatius of Loyola in that she gives you very specific ways to hear God's voice, but it's not just rules for discerning God's will. It's actually rules for discerning his voice, which could be a call to something, or it could be just his words in your life affirming you, telling you something, revealing something to you. St. Teresa goes on and says, "But of one thing I will warn you, do not think that even if your locutions come from God, you will for that reason be any better. After all, he talked a great deal with the Pharisees. Any good you may gain will depend upon how you profit by what you hear. Unless it strictly agrees with the scriptures, take no more notice of it than you would if it came from the devil himself." It's a really important point. God's not going to contradict himself. If you receive a vision, if you receive a locution from God, it doesn't mean that you're holier than everyone else. In fact, it might mean that your faith is actually weaker. And I've said this to people because I do hear God's voice regularly, and I do receive visions when he chooses to give them to me. And sometimes I think people can feel a little jealous, and I certainly would have of other people receiving visions if I didn't receive visions. But the truth is that, it's not that my faith is stronger than yours, and that's why I see God. Every vision, every locution, every communication is a gift from him. And he's reaching me because I'm a visual learner. I think that's why he likes to work a lot with my visual, my imagination, and he likes to kind of guide my imagination. But also, God knows my faith is probably weaker than someone who has lived a really faithful life and finds himself more able to avoid sins or just stick with virtue, stick with consistent prayer life. So God gives me these things because I need them, because I'm weaker. So don't think that if God is not speaking to you through locutions and visions, that your faith life is lacking. No, it might actually be stronger for that very reason. Okay, so let's transition into some ways that you know that a locution, whether it be a vision or a voice, comes from the Lord. Okay, so the first one is power and authority. I'm going to read a direct quote. "The surest signs that one can have of their coming from God are, in my opinion, as follows. The first and truest is the sense of power and authority which they bear with them, both in themselves and in the actions which follow them. I will explain myself further. A soul is experiencing all the interior disturbances and tribulations which have been described, and all the aridity and darkness of the understanding. A single word of this kind, just a 'be not troubled,' is sufficient to calm it. No other word need be spoken. A great light comes to it, and all its trouble is lifted from it, as though it had been thinking that if the whole world and all the learned men in the world were to combine to give it reasons for not being troubled, they could not relieve it from its distress, however hard they might strive to do so." That was a very long sentence, and I don't know if you're like me and you sometimes have trouble absorbing long sentences when they're just read aloud. Basically what St. Teresa is saying is if every reasonable person in the world got together, every smart person in the world got together and tried to convince you that everything's okay, and they couldn't do it because your soul was so troubled, a single word from the Lord carries more power than every earthly reasoning. A single word from the Lord, just be not afraid, be not troubled. If he's speaking to you and it's truly him, his word's going to carry power and authority, and it's going to be able to calm your soul in a way that nothing else can. The second means of discerning whether or not something comes from God is tranquility. So St. Teresa says, the second sign is that a great tranquility dwells in the soul, which becomes peacefully and devoutly recollected and ready to sing praises from God. That's 100% true in my experience. The third sign, enduring longevity of the words. The third sign is that these words do not vanish from the memory for a very long time. Some indeed never vanish at all. And this is interesting because I do find that when God has given me the locutions that I'm most certain are from him, I can remember them as though they happened yesterday. There's one that happened 10 years ago. It's still as fresh in my mind as if it was 5 minutes ago. The next way to discern an intellectual vision is, I have a little bit more to say about enduring longevity. I'm going to read another quote. She says, despite the assertions of confessors that these locutions are pure nonsense, and despite all the unfortunate happenings which may persuade the soul that they cannot come true, there still remains within it such a living spark of conviction that they will come true, whence this arises I cannot tell, that, though all other hopes may be dead, this spark of certainty could not fail to remain alive even if the soul wished it to die. And in the end, as I have said, the Lord's word is fulfilled, and the soul is so happy and glad that it would like to do nothing but praise his majesty everlasting. It's very interesting. It's kind of this hope that extends beyond natural reasoning, really a promise from the Lord. Now let's talk about intellectual visions, using the words of St. Teresa of Avila. So far down in the depths of the soul does this contact take place, So clearly do the words spoken by the Lord seem to be heard with the soul's own faculty of hearing, and so secretly are they uttered, that the very way in which the soul understands them, together with the effects produced by the vision itself, convinces it and makes it certain that no part in the matter is being played by the devil. And I've also found this to be true in my experience. When the Lord has given me visions like the one that I've spoken of many times before, of him giving me his heart and asking for mine in return. In my mind, there's no way that could have come from the devil, because it speaks so deeply to who Jesus is, to the generosity of his love and the perfection of his love and the overwhelming pursuit of each of us that he undertakes, that it couldn't have come, something that pure and beautiful and good could not have come from the devil. St. Teresa gives 5 reasons to be certain that your imagination has not made up these intellectual visions and the devil have not sent them. Here's 5 ways. First of all is clarity. She says, the genuine locution is so clear that even if it consists of a long exhortation, the hearer notices the omission of a single syllable as well as the phraseology which is used. But in locutions, which are created fancifully by the imagination, the voice will be less clear and the words less distinct. They will be like something heard in a half-dream. Another reason is that it could not have been invented. So often, she says, often it refers to the things which one would never have thought or could happen, so that the imagination cannot possibly have invented them, and the soul cannot be deceived about things it has not desired or wished for, or that have never been brought to its notice. And this is another element that, again, I've experienced in my own life, is that the Lord surprises me. Another reason that St. Teresa gives is that the intellectual vision, is heard rather than invented. She says, in genuine locutions, the soul seems to be hearing something, whereas in locutions invented by the imagination, someone seems to be composing bit by bit what the soul wishes to hear. You know, we've all sat down and said, oh Lord, speak to me. And then we kind of like try to imagine him speaking to us. And while that's not always at all a bad thing, because it is a good exercise to put yourself in a place of, receptivity, you do have to be careful that like, am I just like telling myself what I want to hear right now? Or is this the Lord actually speaking? And so we can always ask him, like, please clarify, am I composing this or are you? The 4th reason, each word is endowed with greater meaning. St. Teresa writes, there's a great difference in the words themselves. In a genuine locution, one single word may contain a world of meaning, such as the understanding alone could never rapidly put into human language. And in my experience, there sometimes is, this is what makes it difficult, and part of the reason why maybe we're more eager to kind of discount the Lord speaking to us, because it sounds so stupid, like to try to explain it to another person. In our head, like that one word carried with it a world of meaning, and we understood what the Lord was saying. But when you try to actually recount it to someone else, it becomes very difficult, because you can't explain how you know that this is what the Lord meant. The last reason that she gives is greater understanding, which needs no explanation, accompanies each word. So St. Teresa writes, frequently, not only can words be heard, but in a way which I shall never be able to explain, much more can be understood than the words themselves convey, and this without any further utterance. Of this way of understanding, I shall say more elsewhere. It is a very subtle thing for which our Lord should be praised. So again, this is kind of one of those things where you try to explain it, like, how did you know that this is what the Lord was saying? And it's like, I just knew. And rather than discounting that as like, oh, well, I must have been imagining something, praise the Lord. He's probably trying to speak to you through that locution, through that understanding that accompanies his words and whatever vision he's giving you. So obviously, all of this should be subject to the rule of obedience. You should take it to a confessor, to a spiritual director. But I just want to challenge you and invite you to really listen for the Lord speaking to you in your life and ask him, how do you want to communicate with me? I'm ready to hear your words. I want to know your voice in my life. I think if more of us did that, we would really change the world. I really do. I think that it's much safer to just kind of sit in mass and just absorb, kind of like we're watching a YouTube video or a TV show. It's much riskier to say, Lord, I want to hear your voice. I want to know your will for my life. When I started doing that, my world changed. it has been no less challenging. In fact, it's been more challenging. However, it's the kind of challenge that the deepest part of my heart wants. It's the kind of challenge that feels like the greatest adventure I could ever be embarking on, rather than a challenge that leaves me dead inside and tends toward complacency. It's exactly the kind of adventure that I want because it gets me out of bed in the morning. It's what keeps me doing my ministry. It's what inspires me to write my next talk. And rather than just saying, no, that couldn't be me, just say, Lord, if this is what you want, if you want to speak to me this way, I'm listening, I'm open.